Ladies and gentlemen, you are looking at a man who is a Bob Jones graduate, Bob Jones University, and yet he has walked away from it all. But tonight, we are wondering if he has gone back to his fundamental roots, because Bob Greaves is going to try to get you saved tonight. That's happening in just a moment. Stay tuned.
My name is Bob Greaves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. Good to be back again with you tonight. Hey, you know what? I was wondering, have you ever worried about whether or not you were saved? I know there was a time when I used to worry about it, and although it didn't really happen very often. But there were just times when you wonder, well, let's see, what's the formula? Did I get it right? Was my heart in the right place? And I'm wondering, what the actual prerequisites might be, just in case I got it wrong. And I think one day it did finally occur to me that, this is awful strange if it's going to be, that peculiar, that indefinite, that wondering about it. How can it possibly be anything that I've been taught it was, if it can be even questioned like that? That was a. But at the same time, that can disturb and bother some people, and I do believe that the way that Christianity is often presented to people in some form, be it a kind and gentle form or a very robustly aggressive and hostile form. The message is turn or burn. And so people sometimes want to know, well, let's see, have I done the turn the right way, or am I really going to just burn anyway, quite in spite of what I may have tried to do? And then, of course, then they have to confuse this with their concepts of, oh, let's see, but it's still not of works, so it's not what I did, but did I do what I need to do? And then that gets confusing. And I think that part of the reason why people go into that sort of a situation, why they end up having those kinds of doubts, is because there's a part of them that realizes this doesn't make sense. It's really arbitrary. And it's not really even as clear as we might want to say that it is. I learned the Romans road. You get them to see that they are a sinner. You get them to see that the wages of sin is death. You then get them to see that if they will call on the name of the Lord Jesus, they'll be saved. And then you get them to call on the name of the Lord Jesus, and voila, they are saved. And yet, even though we might present it to people in that clear-cut, step-by-step manner called the Romans road, these people who respond are going to respond later in their lives, at times wondering, was it real? Which means that they're not so sure that Romans road was really the way to nail it down, which indicates to me just how precariously unfounded it really is, because it can remain so unsettled for the people who accept it. But it gets me to wondering, we certainly see this concept of saving or safety and salvation in the biblical text, but does it really mean what we've been told? And if not, what does it mean? And because it seems to be there, and yet we see it used in a very abusive and manipulative manner. Way of trying to get people to, in some ways, I think you create a problem that you then offer the solution to by trying to teach them what sort of danger they are in So once they accept the concept of the danger they are in, they will then respond more positively to the solution. I mean, after all, why would a person respond to a solution to a problem they don't even know they have? But also, the concept of being saved makes me wonder if, I've heard Dr. Jones say, I don't think anybody needs to be saved unless they're in, say, like a burning building. Now, think about it. You're in a burning building and you don't know if you're going to make it out alive. There could be a certain amount of anxiety, or maybe even a certain amount of clarity and peace, and just resigning to the fact that this is it. This is your last moment. This is how you're going to die. But there could be that moment when somebody arrives and brings you out of the building and you're out. Once you're out of the building, would it ever occur to you to ask yourself, am I out of the building? It might seem surreal, but if it's your experience that you are out of the building, there isn't really an honest question of, are you safe? There's a sense in which all of those, oops, I got another incoming call. These things seem to happen all the time. And you know what, Joey, could you play some music? This could be from my wife, and that would be unusual that she would call in such a thing. So maybe I'm going to take this message. Important call. Sorry. That was from my wife. She would never have called me at this time if it hadn't been important. Anyway, we've been going through a little bit of issue with, well, I shouldn't really talk about it, with something that involves, some third party that, anyway, so I won't talk about it. But anyhow, where were we? We were talking about salvation. I think we were talking about in Jesus. No, where we were just getting out of the building where you don't wonder if you're out. You know you are out, and then I was hoping to go from there into something about. We find that we ourselves are asking this question. And after the question has been asked, it sort of creates its own problem by then offering the solution. But I've got to wonder if there's some way in which this concept is getting convoluted in a way that is really manipulative. When I look at the text of the New Testament and I read the things that Jesus is saying, I notice that sometimes when he's speaking to the Pharisees, he tends to speak in a particular way that he doesn't speak when he's speaking to his disciples or to strangers or to people who approach him freely. He seems to speak to them very differently. And it was in noticing this that I began to realize that there are times when Jesus is saying things to the hyper-religious that, as I now understand it, he's not really speaking to them things that are true. He's speaking to them things they should think are true, given the way they deal with a lot of these issues. And that's kind of a weird thing. It's kind of like people will not give up a false view until usually they come to the end of it. And as a result, if you're trying to get a person off of a false view, sometimes it just doesn't help or work to try to talk to them about what's false in their view and what's more accurate and what's more honest. Sometimes the best way to hurry up and get a person out of a very unworkable paradigm is to keep them in it. Let it do its work. Let it fall apart naturally. Let it come to that point that it falls apart. And in realizing that is a very useful strategy. I'm saying that I think there are times when Jesus is speaking to the hyper-religious of his own day, in a manner that's kind of egging them on in their hyperness, pushing them on in what makes sense to them, and so that it will hurry them along to the point where it all falls apart for them. And then they wonder, well, you know, this ain't working. What do I do? And until they reach the end of that road or its ultimate conclusion, they may not realize or be ready to admit that this is not working. And so I think that there are times when Jesus actually speaks to, sometimes when he's telling the Pharisees, that I am the gate and blah, 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 blah. But what does he say to the woman at the well? What does he say to other people who come to him? Sometimes he chides them in a way that you think might discourage them, but they continue on. And what happens when they continue on? Jesus is just greatly impressed with them and does for them whatever it is they asked. And he's trying to, in many ways, see, are you going to come at me religiously, or are you just going to come? I remember one time, it was a weird experience for me. The very first time I ever went to a jail with the jail ministry, I went to this jail, and there was a fellow there who had taken me with him. He was going to teach me how this works, and it was in a small jail. And the way it worked was that there was this kind of a compartment where it was, you enter into this little compartment, the door gets shut behind you, and then after that door's shut, then the door in front of you would open. So it's kind of a spacer between the jail proper and the outside of the jail. And of course, they would use that as a way of preventing anyone from breaking out as they're trying to get in, because the door behind would have to be locked before they could then unlock the door to get into the jail proper. Anyway, what they would often do in this particular jail, some of the prisoners were not trusted or couldn't be trusted to be kind or easygoing, and they didn't have enough guards to make sure that if anyone was there to give a service, that they could be held safe. So they'd allow the preachers to enter into this this area that was the crossway between the jail proper and freedom. And so locked inside of this little thing there, the preacher would stand in there and yell and scream and speak loudly so that he could be heard throughout the entire jail. And sometimes you couldn't even see any of the prisoners, although the jail was constructed in a manner where they could hear you. And from this position, we'd preach, and he'd preach, and he'd preach. And I watched what he did. And then later I'd go back myself, and then I would do the preaching and, learned how to do it and what to say to them and what speak to them and how to, lay on the guilt trip for the things that got them in jail and things like that. And when I think back to the way that I preached the gospel back then, I look back at it and I realize just how abusive it was, particularly to these people who are currently in jail. Now, I do believe in Jesus. I do believe in God. I think that God is big enough to actually be able to ride in on any message. I think he can. I think people who reach out to him find him. Even if they're motivated to reach out to him through unfounded fears, even if they're manipulated into it, if they come to that moment where they're reaching out to God, they're reaching out to God. He's there. But I'm trying to get them to get to a position where they are now motivated to do that, lest they enter into hell when they die, and hopefully to do it with enough genuineness and sincerity that it'll really stick, and that they'll then, it'll change their lives forever from the inside out. I don't think that really happened all that often. It did happen to a few people who really latched on to who Jesus was, found in that great freedom, and their lives did turn around. Some of them from there on out, and some for just a while, and some with a little bit of a rough walk because of the issues they're dealing with. But it made me realize, as I'm thinking back to that, how would I preach the gospel differently if I was to go into the jail and try to preach again? And I realized I would have to go in there with a completely different attitude and a completely different message. And and what would that message be? Well, for one thing, um, I could see myself trying to introduce the message by telling them what I'm not going to say, because that's what they're going to expect. They're going to expect me to hear. They're going to expect me to say something like, uh, you know, God is so ashamed of your sin, and he has difficulty in trying to reconcile himself with you in your current condition. That's the kind of thing they'd expect me to say, I suppose. And I find that today I'd have to start out something like this. I'd have to say, I'm not going to come here and tell you that you are, sinners rejected by God in your current low estate of moral lostness. I'm not going to tell you that because two reasons. Number one, you don't need to hear that crap. And number two, I don't believe that. I don't believe that for a moment. I am not going to encourage you to find a way of mustering up in your heart how to reach out to Jesus and see if maybe you can find him. You don't need that crap. You don't need to be seeing if you can get up enough religiousness inside yourself to see if maybe you can give this a sincere try. I would want to instead preach something to them much like this. While you're sitting there in your cell or wherever if I could see them, it'd be better. But if I was in that, I imagine myself back in that same situation where I couldn't see them, Do you find that your body just regularly needs more air? And so what do? Well, you're sitting there, you take a breath, and you let it out. When your body seems to need another breath, you breathe it in, and then you let it out. I want you to know something. The religionists, they've lied to you. They've taken advantage of your uncertainty and your insecurity, and they've tried to make sure you establish good and solid reasons for being insecure. Because, see, they got something to sell you that'll handle that insecurity. But I'm here to tell you that your insecurity, that's the lie. You don't need to be saved. You don't need to find Jesus. Just like breathing the air. What are you going to do? Look for air? It's there. The gospel of the kingdom is this. The kingdom is at hand. It's there. It's right in front of you. If you take in a breath, you're breathing in the gift of God. You're alive. And if you want to know what God's presence is like, I don't know if it'll make sense to you or if you'll ever perceive it. But my message to you is this. He's right there. You don't need to go searching for him. He's right there. He's with you. Now, I don't want to also preach you some promises that if you turn to him, he's going to start pulling the strings behind the scenes and making your life a much better life and solving all your problems. No, I got to be honest with you. If you got problems, you're going to have to accept responsibility for dealing with them as best you can. And if some of them are problems you can't deal with, you're going to have to accept the responsibility of finding those who can help you deal with them. But one way or another, this is your life. These are your problems. You need to work with them. And Jesus will be there encouraging you as you go about doing that in your honesty. We have a viewer comment. I'm on my knees and crying already. Laugh out loud. And you rock on, Bob. Respect your work here. Well, you ought to be on your knees and crying. Thank you. But the message that Jesus brought to the people who were not religious was a very immediate message. It was a message of you are safe. The kingdom is here. Don't go worrying about it. Don't go looking for it. And don't think that you have to go to all those religious people to find it. They don't have it. And sometimes Jesus would even say that to the very religious, tell them that they don't have it. And sometimes he would tell them ways in which that they need to do it to make sure that they really have it and make it better. I'm thinking of something that Jesus said in John chapter 10. I've been going through the book of John looking for things that stand out to me anymore since the last time I've seen it. And I was looking at John chapter 10 earlier today, in fact, and I was thinking when Jesus is speaking about being the good shepherd, this is a text of the New Testament that has often been understood as Jesus talking about whether or not you are entering into the body of Christ so that your destiny is in heaven. And that's not what he's talking about. In fact, I think that it's translated in a way to kind of enhance that impression, but I think that is in some ways not an entirely honest translation. It's a translation. I can understand that if you think that's what the verse is about, you're certainly going to try and translate it in a way where that is clearer. But I think you have to do a few backflips to make that happen. I really think that this section of the text, Jesus is talking about the people who really get it and the people who don't really get it, and what it's going to take for the people who don't get it to really have access to the people who do get it. By the way, I saw George Takei has some of these unusual photos that he puts out. That some of them are pretty funny. I saw one recently in terms of people who get it. He said it was one of these things. He's in his Starfleet uniform, and the caption said something like, "There are two kind of people in this world. Number one, there are people who know how to extrapolate information from incomplete data." That's all he said, and I thought that was brilliant. I like that. Anyhow, back to what Jesus is dealing with. Jesus says, "I tell you, Pharisees," and so these people he's talking to, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. When he's brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize the stranger's voice. Now, Jesus said this as a figure of speech, but the Pharisees didn't understand what he was telling them. And I've got to tell you, I think a lot of people don't understand what Jesus was saying there. I'm going to try to explain to you what I understand is coming from there. Jesus then said, again, truly, I'm going to tell you this. I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers. Now, Jesus is not talking about heaven. He's not talking about salvation. He's talking about the failure of the religious institutions to really be able to connect with the people who really get it. He's telling them that in your religious institution, you've wanted access to the multitudes. You wanted access to the people. You want the people who bring their tithes. You want the people who are going to follow your authority. And you've tried to get more and more and more of them. And there have been times when a great number of people would do this. But, you're doing this the wrong way. And you're thieves and you're robbers. And what Jesus is telling them is that the gate that he is the access to the people who really get it. Now, by that, I think that what Jesus is really trying to get at is this. There are people who understand there is nothing they need to do at all to be in communion with God. They just realize they are. They don't need the religion. They don't need the teachings. They don't need this. They don't need that. Even if they have no clue what God's name is, or if there's even such a thing as a name for God. These are people who know intuitively there is a God, and evidently there he is. He's just right there. And there's no magic to it. There's no trick to it. There's no secret to it. He's just there. Now, these people, they follow that. When along comes somebody who says, oh, yes, but you must accept the law, you must accept circumcision, you must accept this, they don't listen to that because they just know that doesn't make any sense. And it ain't going to happen. And these are people who know that their access to God is just direct. It's just there. And this is what Jesus is telling the Pharisees. He's the gatekeeper. You want access to these people? You got to go through me. And he's not saying that, that he's kind of like, checking their ticket at the door. He's saying, if you want to have access to God, just come on. Just come on over. Just have access. And once you realize that that's how you have access, you'll also have access to them. And the reason you'll have access to them is because you're no longer trying to sell them something they don't need. And you'll find yourself having a much easier time of connecting with them because they're not going to follow a stranger's voice because they're not really here to follow like that. They're not going to do that. And I see Jesus talking to the Pharisees who have, at this point in time, really structured for themselves this religious institution, this cultural entity of the synagogue and of the Sanhedrin and of all the authorities that are there and the way that it stands against the enemy of the Roman Empire and all that other stuff. And then they're using this as a position of a way of trying to manipulate the people into being their followers. And Jesus says, all who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. And here he's using this word sheep, not necessarily the same way we've used it. I don't think. He's really talking about the people who are, free-ranging people who know God, who love him, who come to him, who understand. And these people who had a sense that there really is a God, but are not really open to buying all of this hubbub that comes out of the abusive, manipulative religiolators. When along comes someone like Jesus, whose message is the kingdom of God is right there. It's at hand. It's here. It's among you. These are the people who are going to listen to that message. Yeah, there it is. It's just right there. It's just, and when Jesus told people that your faith has saved you, Jesus is not talking about the danger that they were in with God. He's talking about the danger they perceived themselves to be in with God. And now that they no longer perceive that danger as a real one, they now perceive that they are safe. They realize they're no longer in the burning building. There is not a problem from which they need to be safe. And they are now experiencing this moment as one in which they are safe. And they find in Jesus the encouragement to embrace the simplicity of it. And when they embrace that simplicity, they're saved from all that worry, saved from all that anxiety, saved from all that potential to be manipulated, saved from all the problems that can come by listening to these strangers' voices who seem to think that somehow the plan, the concept, the ideas, the theology, the ideology, and the precepts that they're going to be preaching to you are something that you need to establish and master before you can find God. It's garbage. It's crap. It's useless. The gospel. There's a sense in which the good news is this. There isn't any bad news. The good news is this. Everything will resolve. All has been taken care of. Do you need God? Just reach out. He's right there. Well, what if there's a problem between me and God? There is no problem between you and God. This is not the issue. I'm here to tell you this. Now, he certainly conducted himself, Jesus did, in a manner that was really troublesome for the religious leaders. Now, the way he talked to them sometimes, he'd give them other instructions, like, I'll tell you what, you guys are so pure. You guys are so law abiding. You guys are so deep into your religious righteousness and in pleasing God. I'll tell you what, if you look at a woman to lust after her, oh my goodness, you've committed adultery in your heart. So you're not as pure as you think you are. And I'll tell you what, here's what you may have to do. If you can't seem to master this sort of purity so that you can be righteous before God, you should really consider plucking your eyes out. I mean, really, seriously. I mean, wouldn't it be better to enter into the kingdom with one eye or with no eyes, blind, and rather than run the dangers and the risks of all that hell you've been talking about? What about your hand? If you find you can't stop playing with yourself, maybe you should just cut your hand off. Then you can be really as pure as you're saying you are. Now, there comes a point in time where you got to realize that Jesus is mocking them. He's making fun of them. He's talking to them about their supposed sense of purity that they're establishing so they can be acceptable to God. Now, I'm not saying that we're open to a licentious lifestyle. I'm not talking about that kind of grace. I'm saying that the love of God in our hearts is something that works upon and invests itself upon that which within us is still awesome and wonderful, that which has real value. And if we're just going to embrace God and deal with it there and recognize the responsibility we have to take to work out our issues, from that standpoint, it becomes a far more doable effort. And even if it doesn't work out, in the end, this is not going to count against you. We have a viewer comment. Bob, when Jesus said that all who came before him are robbers and thieves, was he only talking about the teachers of the day, or was he talking about all of the prophets and teachers of the Old Testament? I think that's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that question definitively, but I get the impression that when Jesus is dealing with the religious, even when he starts talking about Moses, he goes into hyperbole with dealing with them. He goes into sarcasm when dealing with them. So I'm under the impression that Jesus is trying to tell them that he considers the whole kit and caboodle to be thieves and robbers. Now, you've heard me say this before. In my study of the Old Testament and of the New Testament and in the Gospels, I get the impression that the real message of Jesus somehow got lost in all the religiosity. But that I get the impression that Jesus came and was waiting for the proper time to come. And in the meantime, that God was really kind of infiltrating this cult of Yahweh, preparing them to hear a voice in contrast to where they were at. And so I perceive Jesus as someone who came to destroy religion. He came to say, okay, all right, look, I realize that the way you've been going about this made an awful lot of sense to you. And I suppose I can really appreciate that. But it's never going to work, and it doesn't work. It's all false. It isn't real. And I can understand in your insecurity how you had to give this a shot. And so, in fact, many times, one of the things that religious people have to do is they have to really give their religion a sincere shot and effort. See if it works. And they'll, of course, claim it does, But deep down inside, their lives are falling apart. Their marriages are falling apart. Their families are falling apart. I mean, you take a look at what's going on inside of the independent fundamental churches of America. All of the horrific abuses that are constantly coming to the forefront. You realize these people don't have the Holy Spirit leading them into lives that are spectacularly different and far better than the stuff the rest of the lost are living through. Well, these people are some of the most immoral, godless, lost people you can ever find. They're this isn't anything genuine or sincere coming out of them. It's absurd. It's absurd stuff, but Jesus is here to finally do away with the cult of Yahweh. And he didn't come to start a new religion. I got to be honest with you. I I like Paul the apostle. I think he was a genuine and sincere person, but I don't think he got all the religion out. And I think he was radically touched by the forgiveness or the reconciliation that he went through with Jesus on the road to Damascus. Here he is, a person who was actually guilty of not only murdering people who are Christians for being nothing other than Christians, and with intentions to do other things to make sure that he can do it all legally. And he runs into Jesus, who, in a sense, doesn't even really question where he's been or what he's doing. He says, "Hey, look, um, you're a guy of plenty of zeal. I'll tell you what, I could use someone like you. I got something for you to do." And Paul's waiting for the other shoe to drop when he's going to get condemned and destroyed. And it doesn't happen. And it isn't going to happen. And he realizes it's never going to happen. It isn't a problem. It isn't an issue. And he finds that he is safe. Oh, in a moment where he would have thought, holy crap. I mean, think about it. When he meets Jesus on the road, and how hard is it for you to kick against the pricks? He knows in this vision that he's talking to God, but he has no clue that it's Jesus. And so, oh, who are you, Lord? That and then when he says, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," what was going through Paul's mind the moment he realizes who specifically this is, who's talking to him? Particularly given the things he was doing and what he's on his way to do right at this moment. He might have used their equivalent of some four-letter words. He might have gulped real hard. But all of the condemnation that could have come from a moment like that he would have expected from the God that he believed in, wasn't there. Didn't happen. And Paul, in his zeal, then goes out and tries to spread this message. But I think he gets it a little bit too codified and a little bit too zealous, and he ends up leaning in a direction that goes towards a very creedal system, which I think destroyed it. And he also finds himself, unfortunately, at odds with the other apostles. And part of the reason for that is this. I think it's the original disciples are going through a power struggle, and they're not really sure what to do with it. Peter is in some sense a leader, but then James, I call him James the jerk. James the jerk, who's actually one of Jesus' brothers, born after he was a younger brother. Mary and Joseph, had other children. I know Catholics don't believe that, but they did. They had other children. And James is one of them. And he doesn't believe in his kooky brother. He doesn't, it's not until after the resurrection that James is convinced of who Jesus is. But then I see James as somebody who says, well, hey, look, if we're going to stand around here name dropping, and I'm a pretty important guy. I was his brother after all. And he kind of works his way in and belligerently takes over. And if you read his writing, he's got some rather strong belligerence, authoritarian style to himself. And I think that they're going through this power struggle, and Paul has to deal with that, and he sees how this is going to be an issue. And I think that's another reason when he thought it was best that he's really sent to the Gentiles, and let these guys down there in Judaism, that stuff that I now consider nothing but dung for the sake of knowing Christ. And I think this is what even Jesus was talking about here in John chapter 10, that Paul finally entered in through the gate. He's realizing this is it. Just have access because he loves me, because he accepts me, because he has found me and he is there, and he's not going to deal with any of these other things as if they were real issues. He's going to just deal with me as someone he truly loves, wants to be with, wants to abide with, and that this is it. And so Paul moves forward with a really gracious gospel thereafter. But the other disciples are still struggling with, well, let's see, can they eat things strangled, or can they, do they need to be circumcised? Do they need to keep the laws? Evidently, they didn't get it. They're trying to climb in and have access to the people who get it some other way. They became thieves and robbers in some ways. And Jesus is talking about this. And this is the gospel as I understand it. The gospel is that God is love. He is not that ass you heard about and read about in the old covenants. He's not even the ass that you sometimes read about in the New Testament. If you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. When did you ever see Jesus deal with people who came to him in some unloving, harsh, difficult way? He dealt with them in ways that really found them, that secured their genuine love, respect, and trust, and where they recognized he doesn't have any issue with them at all. None. Doesn't have it. It isn't a part of his fabric, it isn't part of his vocabulary. And even if there are issues they need to work with and deal with, well, we'll work with and deal with them as issues. There's nothing personal between us in a sense. What's personal between us is I love you. I think you're wonderful. I love you. I want to be with you. I enjoy your company. And this is where Jesus is coming from. Oh, how did Christianity get so messed up? I wish I understood why it seems to not just get messed up, but stay messed up. But this spirit of religiosity is a spirit whereby people in deep insecurity feel they need to find some sort of formulaic approach, that if you don't follow the proper formula, accept the proper precepts, bow to the right creed, do this, do that, or think this, or think that, or believe this, but not that, that, oh my God, God is going to have a bone to pick with you, and it's going to be a bone that's one of yours, and it's going to be picking your flesh as you're tormented in hell forever. This religiosity is the real enemy that Jesus came to destroy. And it's an enemy that I think a lot of people need to kind of work out of their system. Perhaps we need to even sometimes just encourage them to do that. And at other times, we need to make it clear that religiosity is the enemy of Christ. It is the enemy of the gospel. It is the enemy of the real truth of a loving God. And I think we need to take the time to make that clear. Jesus said in that chapter, he said, I am the good shepherd and I lay my life down for the sheep. And he's talking about the hired hands are and somehow distinct from that. And Jesus knew that his message was going to be so hated that they were going to kill him. And he knew there was no way to give this message and remain consistent with it, but to let that be when the time came, to show them that even the ultimate rejection of his message, that ultimate rejection being his unrighteous, trumped up charged execution, even that doesn't make him have an issue with these people that prevents him from wanting to be with them, wanting to be their God, wanting to have a redemptive role through the presence he gives of his life with them. And we see this with Paul on the road to Damascus. Paul is an instrument, a representative of this system that murdered Jesus. And when Jesus meets him, he's not interested in, pointing out, do you know what you and your people have been doing to me? He just asks him why you're doing it. And then when he realizes who it is he's doing, it's no longer an issue. And so Jesus comes to Paul, a person who's a up and rising star in a community that murdered him. And this isn't going to be an issue. That is an amazing demonstration of love. When we see the way that Jesus was accepting, the way he worked with people, the way he was open to them, the way that there was just no problem of access, even in spite of the fact that they murdered him. This is why we see that through the blood of Christ, we are saved. Even when you take God appearing to us in flesh and murder him, this still doesn't affect in any manner his desire to be a loving presence in our lives. That helps us to realize I'm safe. I'm really safe. I mean, think about it. How could Paul meet such graciousness on the road And I'm worried about this because I was thinking bad thoughts. You know, that's just crazy. It doesn't make sense. When you finally realize it really is as simple as a God who loves you, as a people who struggle, a lot of our struggles created by all that false religion and the narrow-minded stupidity and ignorance that comes out of it. Oh, I could say more about that, but let's deal with that at another time. Creates a lot of the suffering in this world. Well, this world has more than enough assets to meet everybody's need. But we, through hoarding and control and manipulation and power and religious righteousness, find ways of making sure that it's only us and ours that get the blessings of God due to us for our great obedience. You know, it reminds me of that other meme I saw walking around in Facebook. What was it? It was something about, okay, so you say God is going to judge this nation because we're letting gays get married and because of abortion. Okay, all right. So what you're saying is this: God had no intention of judging us because of the way we murdered, raped, and killed and deceived and stole land from the Native American Indian. That didn't in any manner incur God's judgment. The way that we brought slaves over from Africa and put these people into horrific experiences. We owned them as people. How disgusting is that? But that wasn't going to bring God's judgment on us. In fact, God loved us and blessed us and made us a great nation. But now that we're going to give people some equal access to certain rights and not treat them as a class of people who are disgusting just because of who and what they are, now God is going to judge this nation. Okay, all right, I get it. Yeah, I'm going to tell you something. I get it. I think I've gotten enough of that crap. I don't need it, you know. Anyhow, looking at the real gospel, the kinds of things that involve what real redemption is all about, is recognizing that we do live and breathe in the presence of a God with whom there simply are not going to be any issues in terms of our acceptance, in terms of our being beloved, and in terms of any hoops we need to jump through. And we can just follow through with that. And when the strangers' voices come along and telling us we got to jump through this hoop, or we got to do that, or we have to accept this doctrine, or we got to teach that, or we have to give this tithe, and all that other crap, we're not even going to listen to those voices because they don't make any sense to us. They talk to us about things we realize. Isn't it interesting how all of those precepts you think I need to follow benefit you? Well, duh. You know, when am I going to wake up and smell the coffee and realize I'm being manipulated by people who have no real care or concern for? They're hirelings. They don't care about me. They only care about, now, they may think they do, but they're people who are basically religiously working out their own insecurities. They think they found a formula and a way to God, instead of realizing God is the way to God, and he's right there, and he is not stopping anything. I like what that one line in the shack where, are you saying that all roads lead to God, you know, and Jesus replied, no, most roads don't lead anywhere at all, but I will walk any road to meet you. And that's really, in a sense, where this gospel is going. Oh, by the way, quoting the shack reminds me, recently a deal was signed, and I see the shack is going to finally be turned into a movie. From what I understand, some of the same people involved in The Life of Pi are going to be putting it together. I'm looking forward to that. I'm curious to see. I loved reading the book. Anyhow, let me see if we got any more comments. Nope, no more comments, and we only have about 10 seconds left. So let me just say thanks for listening tonight. Thank you for letting me preach and see if I can get you saved. And they call me the Unconventional Pastor. I'm Bob Greaves. We'll catch you again later, some other time. Take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, this Bob Graves guy, I don't know. I think he might be cracking up. We're going to find out next week. Maybe he'll come back down to earth. But I think his teachings are great, and I hope you agree. In just a moment, are theists living a lie? That's what we're going to be discussing up on stage. I'm a theist. I think I might have to take that personally. Maybe I need to lighten up. Anyways, join the discussion in just a few.